So an image you don't want is I am totally naked guy as well. So picture that. I have neighbors here today who often look over the balcony. I am naked guy as well. This is the website I built. You guys saw this website. There's an Ignite talk on this website, but it tests all the web search engines and blind searches them so you don't know which is which and you can test the results. It's something I built. I built it in 3 hours. It got like 25 million views. It was fucking amazing. And I did it in my job and best 3 hours I ever spent. This is another thing that I built. World's biggest Pac-Man. We got to like 14 billion pack dots eaten and it showed a bunch of shit and it tested out browsers and it was an awesome little marketing exercise. Again, it was an afternoon's work. Why am I telling you this? Because the biggest things I did in my corporate job, I spent 6 hours building. So I want to talk about the things that I fucking learned doing that, right? Like the things that I learned by being a guy that was totally unconventional, and I want to talk about the hacker mindset. And there's 3 things I want to tell you about, which these fucking slides go way too fast. This chick, creativity. So creativity is the first pinnacle, the first thing that matters if you're going to do different, important work. Patricia Moore was a woman who was told to improve the American cities. So she dressed up as a 90-year-old woman. She's 24 in that photo. And she experienced the cities and experienced what it was like to be a 90-year-old and learned a lot about how to make cities better. And she improved the cities by testing her limits and dressing as a 90-year-old woman. This dude, Henry Beck, he was a signaling officer. And this is around the creativity again, right? So he was a signaling officer for the London Underground. And as the underground was growing and getting more and more complex, this was the original London Underground map. So he was like, it was very geographically correct. Things were where they needed to be and everything was the right distance apart from everything else. But as the map grew, he was like, this ain't working. The more and more stations we put on, this ain't working. So he went back to the drawing board and redesigned what a map should look like and thought about what people actually need. They don't need geographic distance. They need to know what the stops and what lines they're on. So he brought colors in. It didn't matter what distance things were. He literally rethought the problem. And that's the standard now, right? We all grew up with that as the standard, but that never was the standard. The second thing I want to tell you about is curiosity. It's one of the big things that my entire career was built on, was being curious. Roy used to work for DuPont, and he was building a refrigerant for whatever the fuck refrigerants are used for. And one morning he came back to work and that refrigerant wasn't cold, but it was the same weight, that canister. Rather than tossing it out and thinking he's failed, what he did was cut it in half. And as he looked inside, he found this really smooth, silky substance. And what he did, by being curious, is he inadvertently found Teflon. The hip-hop movement is another good example of resourcefulness. The third pinnacle, is that a fucking word? Yeah, I think so. The third thing is resourcefulness, right? Be resourceful. It doesn't matter. You don't need shitloads of resource. The hip-hop movement is a perfect example, right? Hip-hop was in the boroughs. Hip-hop was something that was done in houses. No one knew about hip-hop until the blackout of 1977, where basically all the hip-hop guys went and stole a bunch of shit and recorded hip-hop. And now we know hip-hop today because they were resourceful. Well, they stole shit. The other resourceful story is Joseph Friedman. He invented the bendable straw. And he did it, he was with his daughter and she couldn't reach the straw on the straight straw. So he threaded a screw through it, unthreaded the screw, bended it, and invented the bendable straw. So my tips on how to be awesome at your job are: number 1, think like a designer. Think with empathy. Think about humans and what humans need. Not like these fucking dum-dums with the bike. You know that bike that everyone just dumps everywhere? That's half a solution, right? It's an awesome idea, but it's half a solution. The other thing I would tell you is ban the average. When you're thinking there's an awesome TED talk on the subject if you Google ban the average. So the US Air Force, as technology was increasing, the failure rates of Air Force pilots was increasing as well. Why was there more failures when the technology was increasing? It's because the Air Force was designing for what they believed to be the average pilot. The average pilot was a certain height, certain arm length, certain thumb distance, and as pilots kept getting in the planes and the technology improved, they were failing. So what they did was decide to ban the average. They went, we're not going to design for a canonical pilot. We're going to design for everyone. So what they did was rethink the problem. So adjustable seating, adjustable, what are they called, steering wheels? No, they're not steering wheels on planes, eh? Sorry, pilots. They rethought the problem because they cared about people. Because there's no such thing as the average person. So if you're doing shit and you're rethinking problems, don't think for the average. This is Norma. This is the average woman in the US in 1950 something. And what they did was they averaged out 1,000 measurements of women and tried to find that woman, and they could never find her. The last thing I'll tell you about is beautiful constraints. He's thinking about it. Stephen talked about it earlier today. But think about constraints. You do your best work when you're constrained. Jerry Seinfeld's famous for it. He doesn't swear on stage. That's a constraint that he forces himself into. Another great example is what's that American podcast? I can't remember her name now. She doesn't sit in the same studio as her interviewees because she wants to constrain herself and hear them only and not see them. Yeah? So think about constraints, think about all the stuff I told you today, and that's how I think about being creative and doing original work. Thank you.